Well, hello everyone. Hope you're doing well. Hope you didn't mind the very kind of over-the-top gaudy intro. I thought, well, I've got to do something at the beginning. It can't just be me talking. I've got to have some sort of intro. That was the only prep work that I did for today's video, and the little background slide that you see. Other than that, it's pretty much going to be a long as hell video tonight, or today, whenever you're watching this. I'm recording this in the evening time. This is my weekend evening because what happened was, we're back in lockdown all of a sudden. We're in cuckdown here in Queensland, Australia. It's the super spreaders, guys. It's the super spreader. Oh, God. I've been consistent. I have been consistent on the issue of the Wu flu, the China virus, ever since it broke out, ever since, February of 2020 when I first heard about it. Before most people, by the way, because I was watching those Medica streams where he was talking about it. And my opinion on this issue has been consistent. I looked at the rate that it, as Alec Manassan would say, turned people from life status to death status. And I could see that it was, the early kind of reporting on it was mixed, like 1%, 3% people that died from it. But it was kind of obvious that it wasn't that big of a deal, at least for young people. Basically just a little bit worse than influenza. And I was like, okay, it's bad news. And I was never conspiratorial about it, even though I do think that the whole, escape from a lab in Wuhan did have some, do you really trust China's reporting on it? Not really. I was never conspiratorial about it, but I just kind of looked at it like, it's not really an immediate threat to me. And I've been consistent on it. I wasn't like Coach Red Pill, like, oh my God, guys, 1 billion people could die from this. And then like a month later being like, oh, it's all a plan to control the masses, like, total 180. I was never like that. I was always very consistent. And I've always said from day one, since February of 2020, that we shouldn't shut down the global economy over a glorified influencer. But, whatever, I'm not in control. It's not my decision. But anyway, that's enough of that. We don't need to ruin the stream by talking about that. So today's video is going to be a Q&A video. I've got a lot of good questions that people asked me. I was really impressed. I thought it was going to be dumb questions, but most of the questions were really good. A couple of them even gave me some very good video ideas, which I'll be doing. But the more simple ones I'll answer in today's video. Now I'll do a timestamp that I'll post down below in the comments section, because I know that not everybody has time for this type of video. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, my normal videos I'm actually going to be doing I'm going to be a bit more concise. None of what you see today where it's just me sort of speaking off the cuff. My normal videos, I'm going to be cleaning them up. I'm going to be improving my editing. So I think you'll like them. I'm really looking forward to the next 4 or 5 videos I've got uploaded. That one I did the other day, that 12-minute video about 1 hour photo, that was just a warm-up. I'm going to do videos similar to that, but much longer and much more sort of in-depth kind of thing. And I'll be doing a bunch of media analysis ones. I think most of you, not all of you, but I think 95% of you will really like them. So I'm looking forward to getting started on those. But yeah, today's video is just a complete ramble, just answering some questions. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's cut to it. So Richard Underwood here has written, do you think most women eventually settle down with their looks match because they realize how impractical hypergamy is for long-term relationships? And a second question is, since we have rarely seen you rate women, is there a scale of sorts that you believe is accurate? Let's do the first question. So the question that he's asking basically is, when you see women walking around with average guys, when you see a woman like in her 20s or 30s, usually 30s, and she's just with some normal guy, a Brad as I think they call it, like what we would probably call a mid-tier normie, something in that area, is it because they don't have any other option? Meaning there's only so many, rich chads out there to go round, and usually those guys have all the options. Is the reason why they end up with the average guy, the normie, is it because they don't have any other option. Like, that's pretty much the best option as far as settling down is concerned, finding someone who actually wants to commit. Like, in other words, do people tend to date their relative looks match because they want to or because it's a necessity given the lack of options? And the answer is obviously because of lack of options, right? But here's the thing, right? Once they do end up together, they wouldn't have it any other way. Like, you could ask any of these women if they would trade their beta providers for the 6'6" guy, the 6 foot tall, 6-figure kind of high value man, as the red pillars would say. They would pass a lie detector test when they say no, they wouldn't. And they don't have some giga chat off to the side. It's not like that. They're being genuine. It's kind of like how, no matter how average your life is, chances are you probably wouldn't trade it for a stranger. You wouldn't gamble it for a stranger's life, even if their life was slightly better, because you've gotten used to your life, That's just how it is. It's like when people go through a disability, right? Or like they have a car accident and they lose their leg. It sounds like they're coping when they said that they wouldn't go back to being able-bodied. And it is a cope, but there's an element of truth to it. Like, they would pass a lie detector test when they say they wouldn't go back, because people get used to their situations. So it's not as bad as it seems, basically. Not sure if that makes sense or not. Let's skip ahead to the next part of the question. So he says, since we have rarely ever seen you rate women, is there a scale image of sorts that you believe is accurate? There is. There's very similar measurements. They're not the same, like obviously jawline and everything is slightly different, but there's definitely a objective series of measurements that determine objective physical beauty in a woman's face, right? And obviously there's a lot of overlap, right? Like jawline, conthol tilt, face-to-width ratios, all of these things. But, those measurements aren't always the same as well. Like, for example, men probably require a little bit more jawline and the ratios aren't quite the same. But things like high cheekbones, there's a lot of, overlap there, which is why, not always, obviously, but why there's a correlation between attractive siblings, But the reason why we don't tend to focus too much on, the facial ratios here in this particular sphere, well, one is because not that many women participate in my look series, but B, it's because men don't tend to put as much focus on it, right? We're not very likely to turn down a girl on Tinder because subconsciously we look at her jawline and, doesn't cut the mustard right. It's not that women's objective beauty standards don't exist or that their facial ratios aren't important, but men tend to be a lot more holistic. 70% of our gaze is on their body. So, and I'm not saying that men don't have standards or whatever, but in conjunction with the high thirst of men, and in conjunction with the fact that we tend to be more holistic in what we find attractive or what we look for, what kind of really turns us on about a girl. Like this picture right here, right? I mean, I don't consider myself to be like a thirsty guy. I am, but I mean, I don't consider myself to have low standards. But I would pretty much do every girl in this photo, with the exception of the 1/3 from the right there, the fatter one. She's the only one that I wouldn't probably hit. All of the others I would smash, right? I wouldn't even think twice about all the others. And I don't consider myself to be like someone who scrapes the bottom of the barrel. Most women that are kind of between the ages of 18 and 30 are going to be, as long as they're not very overweight, they're probably, as long as they're like a 5.5 to low 6, they're probably, worth a poke, right? To put it mildly. So men tend to be a lot more kind of lax in our standards, so there's no real reason to hyperfocus on conthol tilt in women, because men just don't really tend to worry about it too much. It's kind of like a bonus if she has a nice jawline or if she has, nice eyes or whatever. That tends to be a bonus for men. Whereas for women, well, I don't need to black pill you guys, but you know how it is. So the next question here from McLovin is, I thought I was going to get questions relating to this. I kind of suspected people might ask this, given the increased focus on my media analysis. And like I said earlier in the video, that video the other day, the one about 1 hour photo, that was just a warm-up. I actually wanted to do that video again and make it much longer. I was almost going to delete it and start over, but I thought, no, just upload the one that I made, just so I can make a start on the series. But like I said, the future videos will be much deeper and way more analysis given to them. To answer this question verbatim, I don't have like a top 10 or anything. I put together, while I paused the video, I put together this little slide, but this doesn't even do it. This doesn't even do my list justice, right? This is just, like I said, the tip of the iceberg. This is just to name a few. There's dozens of movies that I could add to this that I just couldn't fit on the slide. I have to make the font smaller. I was just thinking about it for a few minutes. But what I'm going to be doing is there's going to be quite a few movies that I'm going to be doing my analysis of. And again, I'm not just doing movie analysis for like something to make. It has a point to it. I'm not just making movie kind of essays because I just want to be a nerd and talk about movies. It relates to the things I talk about on this channel. It's a series I'm going to be doing. And a few of these movies are going to be featured, and I'm going to talk about how it relates to my philosophy and how those movies play a role in what I talk about on this channel. That one with 1 hour photo was just a quick warm-up. I'm going to be going much deeper. Someone asked me about Castaway syndrome, which is when guys kind of become failed normies. They find themselves locked out of the matrix, but then they go to university or whatever, and all of a sudden they're around the normies, and they actually make friends. They might even get a girlfriend, but all of a sudden they're cast back into Normieville, but they don't know how to deal with it. They're like Tom Hanks coming back from the island. They're happy to be back. They're glad to be back, but they don't know how to relate to the people that they once knew. Well, I'm actually going to be doing a video essay about that very subject, so that was an interesting question that I got. But yeah, going back to my little list here, which like I said is missing lots of movies. No Country for Old Men, Fargo, Elephant Man, some other Stanley Kubrick movies, because I'm a huge Stanley Kubrick fan. Saving Private Ryan was a good movie, but I've come to view it over the years as a piece of propaganda. There's a lot of movies that I used to love, but as time's gone on, my perception of them has changed. It's like, I feel like I'm being manipulated a little bit, by the director. They've got sort of an agenda that they're trying to push, right? Which is fine. That's the whole purpose of movies. And Stanley Kubrick was famous for, inserting themes into his videos. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I like Stanley Kubrick movies, because they're so complicated and they've got so many competing narratives that it makes them interesting. But I don't like being preached to. Like, one of my favorite TV shows of all times was The Sopranos, because it just gave you a bunch of morally kind of ambiguous characters. Some of them were clearly bad, some of them were clearly good characters, and others were sort of in the middle. And it forced you to kind of accept them for what they are and just go with the show. It didn't try to manipulate you. Whereas a lot of movies and a lot of TV shows, that's what they do. They try and insert characters that you're supposed to like. I don't want to get into it too much, but I could name a lot of TV shows where I thought they were good, but I always felt like it was giving me these clear-cut good guys and bad guys that I'm supposed to like or dislike, and I don't like that. But yeah, this list doesn't include my favorite childhood movies either, like The Lion King and all of those movies. The point is, right, I do love movies, particularly movies from like the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. I feel like around 2005, that's when you saw a noticeable dip. Probably, and I'm going to do media analysis about some of these movies that you see on the slide here. But probably one of the movies that had the biggest influence on me would have been American History X. I really value that movie. Fight Club was also a great movie. Maybe a little overrated, but I do like Fight Club. You'll notice The Matrix is not on there. I've never been a big Matrix fan, believe it or not. But, I don't mind it. And I actually thought the third Matrix was actually better than people gave it credit for. I could sit here for hours and ramble about movies, but that would be tedious. But yeah, suffice to say, I'm a movie buff. Here's a few of them. If you've got any questions, just, I don't know, put them down below in the comments section. But, tell me what your favorite movies are, guys. I'm sure I missed a few. I'm sure I missed a whole bunch that I like, but it is what it is. Let's move on. What else do we have here? Adrian Monk asks, do you think the US will go to combat in the next 5 years? If so, with whom? It's impossible to say, really, because it depends who is elected president. But it depends if you're talking about a foreign entity or an internal civil unrest. That's kind of the real question. The civil unrest is what most people are thinking about. In terms of foreign powers, there's certain countries that we know that they'll never go to war with because they have certain, deals with that financially benefit both countries or geopolitically benefit both countries, regardless of whatever type of war crimes that country might be committing. That they'll, out of political expediency, they'll give that country or those countries a free pass, like Saudi Arabia to name one. What about Iran or whatever? Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. But it's a lot harder than it was 20 years ago. Like in, the post 9/11 era. It was easier back then because of the politics of the US, right? You had two groups of people. You had the center-left, who were generally not big on the Iraq war. They generally were kind of, a bit so-so about it. The Democratic establishment was gung-ho, but the center-left back in the late 90s, early 2000s were a bit skeptical, as were the libertarians, but they were open to being kind of pushed into it. And the early 2000s, boomers, who were back then sort of the main voting bloc, in their 40s and 50s back then, the Bush conservatives, they were all gung-ho about it because they lived in fear that, Muslims from caves in the Middle East were going to come blow up their local Walmart or whatever. So it was way easier to manipulate the TV generation boomers from the early 2000s. But nowadays, the political scene has changed a lot. The left don't want to go and get into some foreign conflict. Again, I'm talking about the populist left. The dissident right wing, they sure as hell don't want to go sacrifice themselves to... They are not buying the whole... I've got to be careful what terminology I use. The, scaryism. Scaryism. They're not worried about scariest attacks on buildings, right? The only people that are sort of into the whole, let's go to war is the politicians themselves in America. I don't know what the term is for them, but, your classical liberal kind of conservatives. They might be open to it, but it's not like it was 20 years ago. And besides, there's no recent attacks that they can hang their hat on and say, see, we have to go invade these Middle Eastern countries. The real question is, will there be a civil unrest? I don't know about a civil war. That's a different topic. I mean, how do you even define civil war? But civil unrest is absolutely likely. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it because it's kind of larpy, again, as a foreign citizen to go into too much detail about this. But let me just say this, right? You look at countries like Yugoslavia. Why did Yugoslavia fall apart? It held itself together for a very long time. But this is totally getting off topic, but my grandfather, my granddaddy, he was a World War II vet, right? And he was one of the rare people who actually fought in two different theaters. He fought in both the Pacific and in Europe. Both of my grandfathers are actually World War II vets, but I never knew my dad's father. But as a kid, my mother's father, my grandfather on my mother's side, he was a World War II vet, and he... for years when I was a kid, when we would go out fishing together, he would tell me stories. He wasn't really a great storyteller. He would very seldom set the premise. He would always just dive right in, I would crack an unfunny joke as a kid, and my granddad would be like, "Oh, you remind me of old Johnny Walker from back in 1944, who was in my unit." And I would ask him, who was that? And he would dive right in. So we're on a hill, right? The Japs are firing at us. He would never set the scene. He would always just dive right into the story. And my 8-year-old self couldn't understand it. But he did say something that just kind of stuck with me. And I'd forgotten about it for years, but it was only because I was watching one of Mark Felton's videos. And Mark Felton talked about the Yugoslav partisans, and it reminded me of something that my grandfather said when I was a kid. He knew all the way back then, 50 years before Yugoslavia would eventually fall apart, that it was going to. Because he said, those competing, when you've got a country with a whole bunch of different languages, a whole bunch of ideologies, a whole bunch of different fundamental identities, the country cannot last. It will always, those people will always want their perspective, their culture to dominate. It will eventually arise, there will eventually be a conflict, right? And I'm sorry, but I remember back in 2004 when I saw that Barack Obama speech, there are no red states, there are no blue states, there's the United States of America. Even back then, I wasn't articulate enough to quantify it, but I thought, man, that's a cope. There are red states, there are blue states. America has always been divided, and it's just getting worse and worse, and I don't think that they'll ever be able to reconcile those differences. So yeah, it's kind of a political black pill, but I don't think that America can handle the people from Mississippi and the people from the coast of California coexisting under the same federal laws. They're going to have to come up with some solution, more state autonomy or something. I don't believe it's going to get to the point of secession in the next, generation. I would be surprised. But they're going to have to find a way to deal with that because, we came together as Americans after 9/11. It's like, that's just a cope. That's a total red herring. You're just trying to bury your head in the sand if you don't think that the conservative southern right and the northern kind of Yankee, liberal north, if you think that those two ideological kind of worldviews can coexist for another 100 years, that's just totally delusional. They can't. They're going to have to find a way to either coexist by changing the status quo. Again, I'm not sure what the solution is. I would imagine that much greater state autonomy is probably one possible idea. But again, I'm just a spurg, a failed normie from New Zealand. I can't tell the most powerful country in the world how to fix its problems. But clearly, there is going to be conflict there. And people shouldn't trust the plan. Don't go to sleep. Oh, Biden's in charge, what happened on January 6th was just a rarity. No, that tension between the dissident right and the people that they oppose, that is going to cause issues. It's going to cause big issues in the next 20 years, and you'll see. What have we got next? Joe Blosif wants to know what the future of the Grifters is going to be. They started off as pickup artists, then dating coaches, then life coaches. Yeah. They seem to be shilling cryptocurrency quite a bit at the moment. That seems to be a popular one. Probably the biggest one that you're seeing, because they all tend to copy each other. They see someone getting views. That's the whole at Kevin Samuels thing, They see Kevin Samuels poppin', as they say, in that little scene. Kevin Samuels is poppin', and they want to copy Kevin Samuels. So one of the easiest ways is to talk about Kevin, but sometimes they'll try and mimic it. And also Fresh and Fit, which is also a variation of Kevin Samuels' formula, kind of red pilling these women on their dating options and telling them that they ain't shit and that it's over for them unless they settle down with a high value man, whatever. It's starting to catch on. Because to be honest, when I first saw the Fresh and Fit show, I didn't understand why it appealed to the red pill community, because they tend to take kind of a dim view of women in general, right? And this right here, these women that they invite on, they are the worst examples of women, just empty airheads, a face covered in makeup and 1,000 cocks stare and just, not exactly high IQ women. I would say that 30% of the female guests on Fresh and Fit probably know that the sun is a star. Like, they're just not the most intellectual women. So if you generally don't enjoy listening to women talk, why would you invite these types of women on the show? You know, I couldn't figure it out. I was like, what is the appeal? Why are hundreds of thousands of dudes, why do they want to listen to these airheads, these sloozies come on the show? And then I realized it's simplicity itself. You see, the dumber the women, the more intelligent it makes the hosts look, you know. And these women that the Fresh and Fit guys invite on, they're so dumb, it's a great way of straw manning the women and making the Fresh and Fit guys look totally based in alpha. And they get to slap them around and show their, you know, maintaining frame or whatever. So that's the grift. And, you know, I've seen some Fresh and Fit copycat channels pop up, and that seems to be what I think they'll do for the next couple of years. They'll do whatever gets them views, honestly. They'll do whatever makes money. So I can't predict their future, but that seems pretty much the case. So I got quite a lot of questions, obviously. I think I got like 80 to 100 questions, so I'm not going to get through all of them today. What I'll probably do is I'll do a part 2 to this video and then just reply to the ones that I didn't get in the comments themselves. One guy left a comment with 8 questions or thereabouts, so there's a lot to get through. But we'll do a couple more. So the next question is from a guy called Rishi. I think that's how you pronounce that name. And he left a couple of questions, but basically he's an Indian Sal. So let's look at his question. Basically he says, what would you advise Indian virgin Sals with thick accents trying to make it with Stacey's? Well, that's probably not going to happen. But anyway, and how would you make him cope with the fact that their own female counterparts despise them? You know, I'm not really sure if they despise you. I think that's a little bit hyperbolic. I think probably they're ignoring you, but it is what it is. Look, there's a fine line between being encouraging of someone to be proud of their heritage and at the same time recognizing what is attractive and adjusting to that. Like, for example, are you ashamed of your body if you wear a suit to a business meeting? No. It's just the cultural expectation. But there is a fine line between, you know, doing what you need to do to be accepted versus being like some sellout who tries to be someone you're not and, you know, betraying your heritage to appeal to a bunch of blonde bimbos that you're probably going to struggle to be successful with anyway. So you want to be proud of the fact that you are an Indian guy, but also recognizing some of the things that go along with it, like the accent, and maybe, you know, trying to minimize it a little bit. Like I myself am a proud Anglo-Saxon man, you know. I looked up my family last name, and apparently my last name is Anglo-Saxon. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, you know, it's kind of based, I guess. And I was reading, because I don't know much about Anglo-Saxons. Apparently they were one of the early, like, German tribes that settled England and Scotland, whatever. I just know that I'm English-Scottish. That's all I know, because my grandfather was born in Scotland and my grandmother was born in England. And on my dad's side of the family, most of them came from England, Scotland. But, you know, that's all I knew. I don't know much about Anglo-Saxons and Germanic tribes and all of that type of stuff, right? But it was kind of cool and interesting. And it kind of got me thinking, like, you know, there's obviously a lot of problems with the way I look, right? Like I'm skinny and, you know, the horse face, you know, the long horse face and everything, the bad faced with ratios and the slightly big nose, the average jawline and the ever so slightly negative conthol tilt. Like these things, you know, I rate myself as being like in the 5s, right? Just mid-tier normie at best. Now I'm probably like low-tier normie, but, you know, mid to high tier normie in my 20s. I was never a Chad. But, you know, that's the heritage that I come from. It's like, you know, why feel bad about something that was handed to you like that? Okay, so maybe it's not like, you know, the perfect measurements or whatever, but, you know, there's got to be a point where you take pride in where you come from. You know, you're an Indian guy, and I'm not saying you should be proud of, you know, pigmentation of the skin or whatever. I'm not trying to make it all cringy. I'm just trying to say that you don't want to be ashamed of who you are and where you come from. That's all I'm trying to say, right? But at the same time, you also can minimize certain things that will work against you in the dating market. For example, I don't know, this is probably politically incorrect or whatever, but a lot of Indian fob guys, they wear those goddamn sandals when they arrive. You can tell that a guy has lived in the West for less than a year because he wears those damn sandals. And I know this is like the most politically incorrect thing ever, but you can tell. Don't wear the sandals, okay? Buy yourself some nice shoes. They don't have to be even nice shoes. Just don't wear sandals, especially if you're going to like approach a girl or meet a girl off Tinder if you do get that far. That's one little tidbit. Again, the accent, there's not much you can do, but maybe try to minimize it. And again, some people say, oh, you shouldn't be saying that because, you know, you should be proud of your Indian accent. There's a fine line. Like us New Zealanders, we have a tendency to be very nasally. And when I record videos, and now just in general, I try not to be as nasally. You know, I try and speak through the chest. I'm not ashamed of being New Zealand, but, you know, I try to minimize the nasaliness when I speak. And another thing as well, and I probably don't need to lecture you about this because if you watch this channel, you're probably, you know, based on your question, I can tell that you've been around the scene for a while and you know how it is. But another thing I do tend to pick up, and maybe I'm just, you know, projecting my misunderstanding here, but because of the way the Indian economy is structured, because the economy over there is so ruthless, like the amount of inequality in India is enormous. And I notice that a lot of guys in India feel that they're under a lot of pressure to show that they have resources, not just for finding a girlfriend, but I think it's kind of baked into their culture. Like, I notice that when I watch like sports, when I watch cricket, right, a lot of the people in the audience, because cricket is a middle-class sport, right? If you're an Indian living in India, and you go to see the cricket, chances are you're probably in the middle class. And a lot of those guys are always wearing shirts, like dress shirts. Like they go to the cricket and 70% of the men are wearing shirts, like not T-shirts, shirts. Not all of them, but, you know, a lot. And I think what it is there's this social need, a social credit score to kind of demonstrate that you're not part of like the destitute financial class, that you're part of the class that has some resources, maybe not rich, but yeah, like I said, middle class. And I think some of that culture comes over when they move to the West. They still dress in ways. I think it's subconscious. And I know that people say I'm reading too much into it, but I don't think I am. And one of the things that you should try and do as much as possible is get out of that mentality and try and dress more for how it, you know, for what suits you, for what suits your frame, as opposed to just dressing to prove that you're part of a certain class, a certain economic class or cultural class. Try and dress to looks max, you know. This is all things that I don't think it's baked into men who live in India to do. They tend to dress more for the class and not for, or the class that they're trying to present as being part of, as opposed to dressing for what suits them in terms of their SMV. So this is something to take mental note of, but, you know, maybe this doesn't apply to you, I don't know. But that would be my advice for that question. Other than that, you're pretty much at the mercy of what, I don't know, the blonde Stacys that you're apparently going after are interested in. What are some of my favorite channels, like people that I think are like decent channels? A couple of people asked me this. You know, I tend to be a little bit hesitant about recommending channels because I've been burnt in the past. There have been people that I've watched that I thought produced good content, and then I got to know them a bit, and then all of a sudden they would spurg out and just say crazy things, and I was like, man, I wish I'd never, you know, attach my name to that person, right? But what I'll do is I'll show you my subscriber list, okay? The list of people that I'm subscribed to. Now, keep in mind, this is not a glowing recommendation because, like I'm subscribed to Lauren Southern. I don't even remember subscribing to her. I don't even like her content. Maybe I was like extraordinarily drunk or extraordinarily horny. I don't know what was going through my brain, but yeah, that is my subscriber list. Again, a couple of those channels I don't even remember. It depends what you're looking for. You know, some people come on YouTube to be entertained. Other people come on YouTube to be spoken to be given advice. Like they just come on here to look for positive information. It depends what you're looking for. And by the way, in case there's anyone who watches me who are disappointed that I'm not subscribed to them, quite oftentimes what I do is I just manually check on channels. I have like a mental note to go check out that person's channel like every now and then. I mentally take note, like I should go see what so-and-so's up to. But yeah, you'll notice that there's not a lot of manosphere channels there. When I say that I don't watch many of them, I genuinely mean it. I'm just having a look here. The political channels that I'm sub to, I tend to get both sides of the spectrum. So there's a couple of Breadtubers there. There's a couple of right-wing channels, some sort of in-between channels there that I'm sub to. And that's not all I watch in terms of politics. There's also some more kind of, what I guess you would say, fringe content that I watch on other sites that's a little bit more at the fringes of what's considered public discourse, publicly acceptable discourse that I watch on Trovo and whatnot. Someone asked me about my opinion on Breadtube. I'll do that in the next video, but what I'll say for now is that I enjoy getting every perspective, because another thing I've been burnt on is identifying with a given community or a particular, movement or whatever, because half the time it sounds good on the surface, and then you dig a little deeper, you become involved in a political ideology, and then you realize that the people around you are all nuts, and it's like, why did I join this movement? Okay, I liked some of their policies, but not all of them. What they're saying now does not resonate with me. I'm trying to think of what else is worth noting there. PT Pop, man, he makes, I love PT Pop's call center videos. I had to work in a call center for about 5 months before I moved over to Australia to save up some money, and it was kind of a miserable experience, and his videos on call centers, I really relate to them. Who else there that is worth noting? Kraut does great history documentaries, even if Kraut is cringy, but it is what it is. Mark Felton, he does some great... I love history. I'm a history buff, so there's a lot of history content there. Everyone knows JCS Criminal Psychology. What else? Collative Learning beneath Coach Red Pill, one of my favorite channels ever, really. PPP, aka Darker. That's a niche content that I enjoy. I'm into some niche content. Andrew Burkett, second from the top left. That's some more really spurgy niche content that I'm into. Who else? There's a few other names that I'm sure that, and again, this is not all of my sub list. There's other channels that I'm sub to that I just there are other channels that I watch that I'm just not subscribed to. I just manually search them from time to time, or I have another login too. Like I have a second channel where I have a whole bunch of other subscriptions on that other channel. So it is what it is. So another question that I received, hence why there is a game over sign there in the background, is because Coach Whitepill left me a question. Coach Whitepill, who claims to have thought up that name completely on his own, he asked me what my opinions, plural, are on game. So, game. What does that even mean? It's a completely meaningless term. If a guy has a rotation of women, they say he's got game. What's to imply that he used game to get that action, or she for that matter? So game is pretty much, it's like simp. It's just a completely meaningless term. It has a meaning, but it's never used. But given that you're into like pickup art and everything, I will assume that you mean it in the context of which we tend to think of it in this kind of sphere of YouTube, which is desperately chasing after women on the street like a Red Army soldier, thirstily trying to get women on the street to give them your phone number or some crap, I assume that this is the context to which Coach Whitepill means it. Look, if you're a guy, right, and even if you're good looking, regardless of how you look, I've always said this, right, there's a misconception that guys like me are into like giving up. If you go talk to any of the PUAs, they'll be like, oh, you advocate that men should just give up. And it's like, no, every guy should maximize his verbal abilities, right? Like, I've always said that when you're in your early 20s, you should get a job in sales. You you should learn the gift of the gab. I'm not the most charismatic guy ever, but the ability to speak, the ability to articulate myself has served me well, and it served me well with women, just keeping it real, right? You want to maximize the opportunities that you have in life, and learning to talk to women is an important skill, as long as you recognize that it's not a magic bullet, that you will be forever limited by the broader things like how you look, how old you are, how tall you are. As long as you recognize it as just a tool in a toolbox that, by the way, comes with an increasing amount of risk, Women in 2021 don't want to be approached at the mall. Okay, we don't need to go over it, but they have Tinder. They don't want some random, 5-foot manlet coming up to them with the look of desperation in his eye. It's beyond cringy. But yeah, you should learn basic skills in talking to women. In fact, I'm going to be doing a deep dive at some point. There's a really old video, which I think I put on private because it was so old and so cringy, where I talked about how to open a Tinder conversation. I'm actually going to revisit that topic. In fact, someone asked me about that. So I'm probably going to do like a 1 to 2 hour video just sharing my secrets with you, being the incel coach that I am, being Coach Blackpill again. I'm going to be doing a Tinder kind of, basically what works for me, or what used to work for me back when I actually used to try. So hopefully that answers your question there, Coach Whitepill. I think what we'll do now is, I think I'm going to do a lightning round. Like I said, I'm not going to get through to everybody in today's video, not even half of the people who asked. I got dozens and dozens of questions, so I'll do this in multiple parts. But I will do I'll do a lightning round. Let's do that. Okay, let's just go through these. Will you ever do a collab with Wheat Waffles? Yeah, definitely. I think we agree on like 85% of issues. I'm not intimately familiar with all of his opinions, but I think we pretty much have a similar philosophy. But yeah, I think he did a stream with Face and LMS, who they agreed. So yeah, absolutely. If he ever wants to invite me on for a stream, I would say yes to that. What are your thoughts on lifts, elevator shoes? Do you think they are worth the money or just look silly? I'm not sure if they're worth the money, but if women can wear heels, we can wear elevator shoes. Like, of course, I've always been in favor of guys giving themselves a leg up on the dating scene whenever they can, basically. And I have seen guys wear them, and there were a couple of photos I've seen of guys wearing them where they weren't entirely convincing. Like I saw a photo of Alpha Destiny, and you could sort of tell that he was wearing platform shoes because he's a manlet. I like Alpha Destiny as a guy, but he is a turbo manlet. And yeah, you can see it sometimes, but maybe just like the ones that don't add too many inches, because I think they come in levels of like 3 inches, 2 inches, by the ones that are less noticeable. Okay, let's move on to I think we'll make this the final slide, and I'll continue on with part 2 after this. So the last questions here on this slide, what is the impacts? Basically, this guy's asking if it's better to look older or younger as a guy. Well, it kind of depends, really. It's contextual. For example, if you're a 19-year-old guy and you want to match with women in their early 20s on Tinder, then it's better to look slightly older for your age. Like if you're a 19-year-old guy and you're going on a date with a 22-year-old and you lied about your age on Tinder and said that you're 23, then it's better to look 4 years older. Whereas if you're a 40-year-old guy and you're trying to match with women in their 20s on Tinder, then it's probably best to look like you're in your early 30s. So that's totally contextual. But generally speaking, as a broad kind of concept, it's better to look younger for your age because you've got the rest of your life to, be a little bit older. Like you hear it all the time. People, when teenagers are 16, they just, they wish that they were 18. Or if you live in America, they wish that they were 21. And then by the time they're 31, they wish they could go back to being 21. So you get the idea. The last question is about how to help depressed family members. Gee, that's a complicated one. I think we'll save that one because that's not just a quick answer. That's an entire video in and of itself. So I think we'll save that. Anyway, If I didn't get to your question, don't despair. I'll do it in the next episode. And then after that, I'll be returning to my list of video topics that I'm going to be doing, which I'm looking forward to. I have at least 2 to 3 years of content already written down on a piece of notepad, because that's how long it'll take me to do everything I want to do. And in that time, I'll probably find like 5 more years worth of video topics to do without even trying. So I'm not going anywhere. I will be back in the not too distant future. And yeah, thank you for listening.